There were always two types of Indigenous people I grew up with. One was culturally rich, financially poor. Flip it around, the other one was financially rich, culturally poor.
Mm. Welcome to episode 20 of the Crownsman podcast. I'm your host, Jared Downey, and my lovely co host is Gowdy Molina.
Good morning. Oh,
Good
wait, I
morning.
don't think it is morning
Good
today.
afternoon, because we had a change in schedule.
Yes, we did.
That's good. Change is good. It throws you off and it makes you reset a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
keeps things spontaneous. And this show is, we're shifting gears a little bit. We've got a special guest in here today because I've known him for years. We'll actually get into on the show our relationship, and I kind of wanted a theme for this show, which is a little different than we've done it before, is a theme of honesty. And when we started the show, we really wanted to champion industry. But as we move forward, you have a lot of different perspective. You have people that are trying to get the industry to be more green. You have people that are challenging ideas. So it switches back and forth a lot.
Yeah.
And in almost every, when we're talking to mines, and there's a discussion of the relationship between Indigenous people and heavy industry. And so that's something we had to have a show about that. And so I asked Frank to come and be on the show because he grew up in actually the same area I did, which is mining, forestry. There's there's pipelines, but Frank has also moved into the tourism industry. So he's got so many layers.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to do a show, and so we've got Frank on here to have an honest discussion about the relationship between heavy industry and the Indigenous people, and with tourism. So it's going to be a very hopefully an honest discussion and an informative discussion for people really in this case really in any industry. We're going to go a little bit broader with it because it really applies to anybody who's living in these communities.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
before we introduce Frank, Gowdy, who are our sponsors today?
Yay. We could never do this show without our sponsors.
We certainly could not.
So first up, we've got, again, so I wanted to mention a structural geology and mining course for you. This is put on by Sean Daly, who has a Bachelor of Science in Geology, a Master's of Engineering in Mining and Engineering. The purpose of this course is to learn practical aspects of the relationship between structural geology and mining, with an emphasis on open pit. The course starts May 6th, so you can register by emailing peter.daly@hotmail.ca, or you can follow the link in the description below. You can also contact Sean Daly by phone at 778-386-7532.
Awesome.
Yes. No, I'm not done.
Oh, I know. I know.
Okay.
I'm just taking a breath. No big deal.
We also have our sponsor, Savannah Equipment. If you need anything or everything from slurry pumps to jaw crushers to ball mills to conveyors, go to the leader in used mining equipment. That's Savannah Equipment. And you can visit them at savannahequipment.com, where you will find more equipment every day, and electrical too.
Yeah. Yeah, they've got thousands of items. So,
Yes.
okay, Frank.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for making the drive all the way down to visit with us. Appreciate
Yes.
it.
Well, thank you. It was a beautiful drive this morning to be down here.
Yeah, actually, I saw the weather this morning. I thought, oh, good. At least he's not having to drive in rain or I think the snow's done on the Coke this year.
Yeah, it's starting to melt more and more every day, and you don't see as much as snow sledders, I guess you call them now. But the recreation is switching over to summer now.
Yeah.
So.
Actually, I was going to talk about the heavy industry first, but you mentioned before we went on air, you've got a company that you founded, Moxon Trails,
Mm-hmm.
and you're actually launching that in April, aren't you?
Yeah, this will be our second launch. We did one in the fall,
Yeah.
right at Quayote Lodge, where I used to work for about 12 years, and now we get to do it right into the city of Kamloops. So now we're going to be inviting definitely all of the managers and corporations and the people that want to be a part of our company.
Yeah. When we first, you mentioned that you were going to start something like this 4 years ago or something, And it always was shocking to me that this wasn't already there in the interior. Because on the coast, they do canoe tours,
Mhm.
and it doesn't exist in the interior. It just
Mhm.
amazes me that it
Yeah.
never happened.
Well, we have definitely a lot of lakes and rivers up there,
Yeah,
so I guess the concept come to me again, being working at a resort by a lake. I always looked at our indigenous values, and our one main way of looking at it was actually traveling on the water, and we just never done that. And 2 years ago, on their 25th anniversary, I helped develop a project with two authentic traditional canoes. So
yeah,
that's what kind of sparked me in going into the direction I am with my company.
yeah. That's it's amazing. I wanted to get into a little bit of just so the audience has a bit of an idea of
Mm-hmm.
what Frank has done. You're the founder of Moxon Trails, which just I don't even think I've got all the boards that you're on listed
No.
here. The chair of Thompson Okanagan Tourism Association, TOTA. You were 12 years at Quail Lodge.
Hmm.
The coordinator of the I don't know, I did something funny there of the Shuswap Indigenous Tourism Strategy.
Yeah.
Um, what
Sp-
is
Splat scene.
Splatsine?
Yeah.
Economic Development Board. You're a member of that board. You're the member of the Adams River Salmon Society. Does the salmon run this year?
No, this is the last year was their dominant run, 2018. So the
Yeah,
next one is going to be in 2022.
2022.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, it's every
4 years.
4 years.
Yeah.
Wow, it's crazy. You're the board member of the Bonaparte First Nations, or you were
You were, yeah.
were a board member, and you're the co-chair of Indigenous Tourism of BC. And then
Yes.
there's a whole bunch of other stuff that you do.
Well, definitely it's a broad of the boards I sit on, and it always started from the pebble in the pond kind of ripple. I
Yeah.
started with the local boards, and then I just kept asking questions. And it's kind of unique because my indigenous name's called Shawi. And Shawi in our language means Shawita, means to ask questions.
Uh,
So I kept asking questions and they kept opening doors. And that's where I got to where I am today.
yeah. My
Wow.
my wife says that I'm curious,
Yeah.
so that's why we get along so well.
Yes, you're another Shawi, that's for sure.
Some people call it annoying. I don't know. I'm just asking questions.
Well, yeah, finding the answers for those questions is our definitely daily goal.
Yeah. Want to talk about you and I had an interesting conversation just a couple weeks ago, and you were talking. We were talking about the relationship between heavy industry, indigenous people, and I'm always whenever I use that that kind of terminology, indigenous people are also living besides other communities, and
Mhm.
they're mixed in. So it's sort of limiting to just say because it's the relationship between heavy industry and the communities around them, which
Mhm.
include the indigenous people.
Mhm.
Um, but on a general, and we'll dig into it a little more as the show goes. What sort of, how do you view a mine that's right next to, you know, Bonaparte, or within an hour's driving
Mhm.
distance? How does sort of, I guess, what is your view, and what do you think the general feel is of the communities that are beside these mines?
Well, I guess it goes back to the generations that have lived in that country or lived in that area for quite a while time, and following the different other industries before the mining industry came into play in our area, ranching industry, the forest
Mm.
industry, obviously were the main employers of that area. So as when the mining industry came in, you got to, back then it was job was a job, and it was an opportunity to have a better lifestyle. And it didn't matter what color your skin was; it was
Mm.
just to better your life, so your children have a better life. And I figure, when you see the pipelines and everybody comes in, it's almost a double-edged sword for indigenous communities now, depending on where their economic development is. And there are some very keen communities that followed suit and started doing the due diligence of following the economic growth in their communities, depending on what industries were around them. For example, my community, definitely and some of my family are involved in that mining industry that work in there. So, again, it's not something, it's more of an individual choice now versus it was a community standstill with it.
Yeah.
So, definitely different views now from a leadership role where I was in as a counselor for 2 years. How do you stand with these industries that come into your territory? How do you consult Where do you come from? So again, it's the community values, and again, if you're an economic uh, provider in your community or a driver in that community, it's really going to showcase where your community is going to be with these industries.
How much better do you think than even 10, 20 years ago? Do you think the bands are at negotiating with the pipeline companies? And I don't mean just better as getting a a better deal for them, but also moving these projects forward for the employment of their people and everything. How much advancement do you think has been made?
Oh, there's some communities that are, especially through the pipeline. I know a few communities that openly admitted that they're working with these industries to better, because no matter what, it's coming through, and they either get a piece of the pie or they just watch it go by.
Hmm.
And they're getting involved from the infrastructure right to the decision of how things are being set up. So the employment rate is quite high in some of these communities, and then there's some communities have zero unemployment rate. So again, depending on where that pipeline is going through at a
Yeah,
certain section, so there's an offset to it too, right?
yeah. I sometimes wonder, not sometimes, I've mentioned this to you several times, that and I the opposition to something like a pipeline gets quite a bit of media coverage. I've
Hmm.
noticed it gets quite thorough. They'll do a whole spot on it. It'll be a half-hour show
Hmm.
that they'll dig into it. I've never heard, and I may be wrong. Now, please send me the ones that show that I'm wrong. But I've never heard that sort of in depth for the bands that are supporting it, that are saying, no, our community is in talks with them. It might be a little, a 30-second clip, but
Hmm.
in depth of what it is actually bringing to the community, how the negotiations have gone. Why, why do you think that is? If you were to guess, why does that? Why does sort of the opposition get so much coverage? Which is, I mean, they have every right to oppose it, of course.
Hmm.
But why is there so much coverage when you have, maybe five bands that are against it, and you've got 30 that are saying yes?
Hmm.
Why don't you think those 30 get just even a little more coverage?
Well, again, news, the only way you're going to have news and provide news to people that want interest is usually the negative side of it.
Yeah.
There's definitely two sides to the story, and for me, when I see that, especially individuals that definitely have that ability to grab that attention, and it's usually the louder they scream, the louder they make noise, and when they speak on behalf of our nation, it's really what kind of like for me, I'll give you an example of when the 2010 Olympics came,
Hmm.
and they were talking about the Sea to Sky Highway, and the War Society, they called themselves, got up and took the Olympic flag off the in Vancouver here, and they said they were doing it for honoring an elder, and in reality, it was really honoring themselves because they were bringing the attention to them. It was negative, it wasn't positive, even though they spun it off as a positive. It really was the attention was going back to their society. So
Hmm.
again, it's how you look at what directions and organizations are going in that way. And it's changed since then. And definitely there's a lot of people who are opposed to the pipeline based on is it going to benefit them individually? Is it going to benefit the area? So is it something that's getting laid down and been through there? So I think there needs to be a lot of uh, group discussions. When you build a partnership in anything, you have to build that relationship. And sometimes I think, from the government's view, they think they've done it by consulting certain nations or certain leaders. Well, those leaders don't communicate to their communities, and I
Yeah.
think that's where the breakdown is. I think it really needs to be brought from the grassroots up versus from the top down. So that's where I see the changes that need to be. When I was a leader, I know that was something that in my community you had to communicate with the community before you even did anything. So sometimes that gets missed on some of the opportunities because there's always a short timeline to the decisions they have to make. And in the long run it will pay off, but in the short term they need to go back into their communities to share that information, what's coming down.
Yeah. Do you think now, you mentioned things like the logging industry now. Now there is definitely a push from some of these bands. I've seen it from multiple bands in the interior, and I'm sure it's not just BC that it's happening, where there is a push to take a lot more control over the assets that are on their land, and essentially make more profits off those assets, as opposed to here's your fee, and we're going to go slice it all down and see you later.
Yeah.
Are you seeing? Do you have any examples specific of where you're seeing that sort of progression?
Yeah, well, I can again go back to my community
Yeah,
in our what we call our natural resources department,
yeah,
where forestry is now. We're hiring people to come in to help manage our forests versus just selling our forests.
mm-hmm.
So we're gonna be more selective of what the logs are and what they're doing in our area. So if we want a specific piece out there, we can now manage it. So we're almost it's almost like gardening, right? You take out what you need and
Yeah,
leave the rest. Where industry, the forest industry come in and they just take what they want, and all of it gets taken down. So again, best forest practices. I don't go anything against forestry. But again, it's an industry that's been here for quite a while, but they also know how long our logs are going to be out there. So again,
yeah,
it's that how do you slow it down and how you keep managing to keep generating jobs. I
yeah,
think that's the biggest part of it all.
yeah. Do you how long when somebody, and I'm not saying in your community it's an example, but it for sure it's happened where companies have come in and taken advantage. They've got better lawyers, better negotiating
Yeah,
skills. They come in and they get a great deal for themselves and cut and go.
yeah.
How long do you think it takes for a community, like a Bonaparte community, to then sort of be able to feel comfortable walking into that door and being confident, no, we can negotiate a good deal? And for the company now, because they know now, okay, no, now Bonaparte's going to come in with better lawyers, and everybody's getting more aware. Does it does it take time to then sort of mend that sort of, the deal that got signed 30 years ago?
Well, again, it goes through generations. There were certain ways how you did business 30 years ago to
Yeah.
compare how you do it today. I think we're on the same page. Sustainability is a huge word that's been spread across industries. How
Yeah.
do we, keep everything that were natural resources as long as we could versus extracting as fast as we could?
Yeah.
So again, it has a more of a people feel
Mhm.
versus an individual feel. Because before it was just one person making decisions back then, and they followed suit. Now we're having that negotiations of why we want to do it the way we want to, not tell you, but why.
Yeah.
And that's a totally different approach from every angle when you deal with any type of industry in your community in
Yeah.
your area.
Um, what about, and this is to dovetail into the tourism industry.
Mhm.
When you're in that business now, but yet so many of your community, which is very similar to my circle of people that I know and that I grew up with, so many of them, I mean, half the kids that I grew up playing hockey with are now working for the mining
Mhm.
companies. Well, the mining companies dominate the two big mines in the Kamloops area. I mean, almost everybody I know is working for them
Yeah.
that I grew up with. Um, how do you find that line? I know it's a big question. That's something people are going to be dealing with for the next 100 years.
Yeah.
But how do you find that line between putting a giant hole in the ground and messing up the landscape, because as hard as you try, you are doing that,
Mhm.
and being able to have a canoe that goes down this beautiful river? Where do you think you start to even have that balance?
For me, I guess, again, I said it a little bit earlier in the show here, where you have to really look at your personal values, how they're passed
Mm-hmm.
down through your parents, your grandparents, what type of industry did they work in. Like my dad worked in the forest industry and the ranching industry, worked in a sawmill when he retired. So, he followed his own path of what he knew he can get by on. Now, I think those opportunities have grown, multiplied.
Mm-hmm.
And some people, depending on the small town atmosphere, and if they feel if they don't want to leave that area, well, then that's where they head. They know
Mm-hmm.
that there's an opportunity there.
Right.
And so for me to grow myself, it's again, I never thought I would be an entrepreneur, put it that way. Who'd ever thought they'd own their own business? Or, most people dream it,
Yeah.
but when you actually are doing it, again, it's a goal of my own personal path that I followed. And it was, again, I stumbled upon it. It wasn't something I thought of when I was in high school. It was something that, I experienced a lot of different organizations and and industries that I worked for, and realized that I'm more with people. I want to share and like you, I'm never picking sides because I've always been neutral in everything I've done in my life, and I think that's why I've gotten to where I am. And to close that off with why these men and women choose to follow an industry is because they see a better lifestyle for their children.
Mm-hmm.
So the question you're asking is, how does the cultural teachings, how does the cultural, how does that follow suit with the land that they follow, the animals and themselves, the people? It's gone into a society now where we're getting mixed into where there is no more divide. Again, 30, 40, 50 years ago, there was a divide of indigenous and non-indigenous communities. So now that's that the inner racial marriages that are happening. Everybody, my children are half Métis. So again, it's just the kids are not growing up the way they were growing up for 40, 50 years, where they were isolated to marry one particular group. Now those groups have expanded.
Mm-hmm.
So the thinking and the ideal of our next generation, your guys' next generation is
Right.
coming. It's really opening up the minds to how we're working together, and we're no longer looked at as Indigenous peoples. We're looked at as part of Canadians,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's a huge step for everybody. And I think that's the biggest struggle we have is depending on how you're raised, where you're raised, and how you relate to the people around you. That's the biggest step. And I grew up in a public school. I didn't go through residential school, so I missed that boat, which is good.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I really got the opportunity to learn what other Indigenous and non-Indigenous kids got along. So that's why how I got to know you.
Yeah. Yeah, when we grew, I mean, yeah, I know. I mean, in the area that we grew up, it wasn't. It was just mixed.
Yeah.
As you start to get older, though, and like I said, the opening of the show, I wanted it to be an honest discussion. I never thought of, I never thought of indigenous, which wasn't even the words. That wasn't even a word when I was growing up.
Yeah.
And white people, and it wasn't a thing
Yeah.
when we grew up because we were just growing up together as kids. But then I did notice that as we got into my teen years, there was more separation,
Hmm.
and that was that you started to see that people that were becoming isolated. More people were moving away, but the kids in Bonaparte that I grew up with, they were staying. And now I've seen though, now a lot of them have done really well for themselves, which was good to see. Um, but it's sometimes on sort of a macro level, you can see that it's moving forward, but you still get a sense that there sometimes is that separation. And I've noticed one thing I noticed with you, and when we you treated everybody the same, everybody.
Hmm.
And when we would come to, you'd put on a golf tournament, and it was this mixture, and I don't think you were trying to set yourself up as a leader, but because you treated everybody the same, it sort of eliminated that.
Hmm.
And people coming from the coast, people coming from the interior, and was that a conscious thing? The way that you sort of just will not you just will not accept to treat people differently based on their status or their ethnicity or their culture. Is that a conscious choice, or is that something that you came to?
Well, again, I give my blessings to my parents and my surrounding family members who've helped me understand what our traditional values are, and it really makes a difference to how you grow up and how you vision the world.
Mm-hmm.
And everywhere I've worked and what I've done, I was always given the opportunity, where I was never told no, you can't do it because.
Yeah.
So I guess I walked into a world where someone has to start this,
Mm-hmm.
and those relationships I built over the years, and why I had a diversity group of people, is because I was involved with the golf industry for quite a few years. I think almost 30 years,
Yeah.
and I had all ages and genders I golfed with. And the only reason I held that term is because they all were friends,
Mm-hmm.
and I could never golf with them individually anymore. So I put them all in one group, and I
Yeah.
got to do that. So
Yeah.
I guess it just comes with being I don't call it a natural leader, but a natural draw to feel safe.
Yeah.
And I think a lot in this world today, that's not a word that you use very often.
No.
So it's being safe and in an environment where it doesn't matter if you know the individual, you know they're there for the same reason, and that's to enjoy your day of golf and get to blend those groups together and get to know how I get up there and I can still act and still be able to act the same way and be and people know who I am.
Yeah.
I think everybody wants that legacy in their lives. So I'm trying to grow it for my children to see that diversity. But most of all, I want to see people enjoy and get to know, meet new people. Like again, I met Gotti today
Yeah.
for the first time.
Yes.
I know you've been quiet over there quite a bit, but
Yeah.
it's like a friendship conversation. But I tell you, it's definitely an insight of where we come from and what we do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's funny. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you guys worked together for without meeting for how long?
Quite
O-
some time.
Over a year,
Yeah,
I think.
I
Yeah,
think
over a
so.
year. Yes.
Yeah.
It I know it was very interesting. It's hard to work with someone just over emails or phone calls. It's not I think it's you don't really get to know the person.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, especially because it was more conversations about business than anything
Yeah.
else.
Well, you're there to do the facts and get the things right for us. And without your dedication to helping us develop what we have, you're developing a dream, and that's you made it a reality. And like I said, this May 1st is our opening day for our company.
Wow.
So and where we wanted to build it in the Kamloops area, and
Mhm.
so yeah, it was a dream. Now it was a reality based on all the work that you've helped us get through.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a fun project.
It was.
It was. It
Yeah.
was. It was interesting to be able to take when we were sort of developing the plan for Moccasin Trails and kind of trying to piece it all together. It was interesting. I was. It was a combination of being surprised at how much I actually retained from being a kid and going, oh yeah, okay, I know what Frank's talking about when he's saying he wants this or it needs to be this way, and also how much I went, oh, I had no idea
Hmm.
that I just. And I remember even there was a couple things I sent to you. I said, I'm not comfortable writing this. Like I can't develop this. This is me talking about your culture. That's not my place. You'll have to fill these blanks in.
Yeah, and I guess when you look at our English language, it definitely has a spin of who we are. It makes us all neutral, but it definitely, when you look at the English language, is very hard to pinpoint how it is. That's why lawyers do so well. They can change the words very quickly,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
and with our and having the diversity of our Indigenous languages in BC, it's very unique to have around 25 to 30 different languages and nations in BC out of 203
Absolutely
communities.
crazy.
It's huge, and I love looking and learning just like you. And even though we say I'm Indigenous, I go to on the West Coast or up north or down south. I learn a wholly different culture, and there's definitely a lot of connections to it. But for me, just to be I went on, for example, I'll give you a quick run by. Is I went on a canoe trip that I got invited to down in the Okanagan Nation,
Mm.
and it's usually done on July 4th. It's basically a peaceful protest to go from it's called the J8 Treaty, and you basically start from Osuyas, go right down into Omak, I think it is, and then not Omak, but what's across from there? But there's another piece of across a border. What they have, it's really cool. You get on these traditional canoes they carved and they go across and they meet people. They have a big picnic. July 4th there obviously is like our July 1st day.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's so huge and so many people.
Wow.
And they cheer when we come into those canoes. And it took us about 4 hours to paddle to get there. And it took us about 5 hours because we ate lots and we were lazy. But we came back and I always said we went against the wind both ways, I tell them. So, but for me, just to be involved and invited, and it was a free event. There was no
Mhm.
charge to it. It was to come experience the culture and their cultural ways and their protocols and their traditions, and just to get in a canoe and just be part of a canoe family. And it was really neat to, and that's kind of what, again, it resonated to me, to my business, is like, this is what people are looking for.
Mhm.
And it's not just non-indigenous visitors or guests from around the world. It really has to come from interest.
Mhm.
And definitely, if you look on the Indigenous tourism of Canada statistics and Indigenous tourism of BC, Canada is the number one country that wants to learn about our own Indigenous peoples.
Canadians want to learn
Yeah,
about, yeah.
Yeah.
and that's really cool. I never thought that I'd see that coming, and I can do see it based on building that canoe 2 years ago. Well, God, no, yeah, 2 years ago. How fast people were wanting to come learn
Hmm.
because we took down this invisible wall of because it was a business they thought they had to come into the resort and pay and when we went to learn about our culture in reality it was you can come and sit down and let's work on this canoe and work and then build and let's talk about the local history behind this canoe,
Oh, this is the one the one you built,
the
right?
project
The
at
project.
Dequia.
Yeah, I went out and saw that. Yeah, it
Yeah,
was something.
yeah, so that was something and I'm still looking at helping to progress that even though I'm not employed there at that lodge. And I think I said this a little bit earlier too, was it's not about the money.
Hmm.
A culture has an open opportunity, open end. There is no closure to it, based on how you're gonna learn it and work with the communities and the elders and the youth and the community members and the locals. I think you really have to really understand if it's a business driven thing, then depending on who you are, I'd never allowed people to feel that way. And like you said, I was always inviting.
Hmm.
And because the locals want to learn this much about who we are and what we are. I think the best story, I don't think I've ever explained this story to you, but I did it when I was doing those canoes. I was bringing them around to different shows. And I brought them to this one trade show, and she was around 90 years old. And when we decided to build those canoes, it was 65 years since a canoe was built in that community. So, I got tired of talking about the past. Let's bring the past to the present and let's celebrate it today for the future.
Hmm.
And because I was getting on that July 4th canoe, it was a really simple decision for me, but it wasn't my decision. It was an ideal I had to put on to the elders. They had to really think about it and says, well, the last one they thought it was 65 years. So once we got through the project was about 60% done. And it was so cool when this lady walked up to me, not Indigenous, she lived in that area all her
Mm.
life. And she walked up to basically the end of the show. She had her hands behind her back and she was watching me for most of the day. She wouldn't come to me until the end of the day when most of the people left. Then she finally came up to me and approached me and says, geez, I haven't seen one of these in about 60 years. I looked at her and I go, 65 years to be exact, ma'am, is what we kind of calculate in their community where how this canoe became what it is. I just asked her, well, where did you see one? Oh, she says, my dad and I, when we were younger, he said, we used to watch these canoes come down the river.
Mm.
And I said, oh, okay. He says, I was pretty young then, but my dad was an avid fisherman, canoeist, outdoors. He says, but at the time, he says, when we saw the men coming down the river, we knew they were working to gather and catching the fish. So we didn't want to interrupt them. He was like, oh, leave them alone. They're working, gathering the food for the winter. He never got the opportunity to go to the men and talk to them and say, let's look at his canoe. Well, he passed on. So what she did, she says, is it okay that if I, look at the canoe? So she went up and down the canoe with her hand and she was looking at everything and looking at the angles. She looked at me and she walked away. Before she walked, she says, thank you. I said, you helped me live out my dad's dream, and I get to now share it with him in heaven. And I looked at her and I go, wow, that gave me goosebumps because
Hmm.
it's like, it wasn't just for, that project was kind of, when I was doing it, was kind of for the Indigenous to bring it back for the values and the cultural beliefs. But I totally forgot that there were people always watching
Yeah.
us build those canoes
Mm-hmm.
and to use it and how do we develop it. So that to me opened my mind to like, and now this canoe needs to go out even farther and do more things.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where those canoes are today. They're not just an art piece; they're actually going to be used, and that's something I look forward to
I
helping
think
develop.
that's, I don't think you can say enough how important it is because I mean, when I was 13 years old and I saw a canoe on the wall, why would I care?
Yeah.
And none of my friends cared. Why would you? Maybe there's one kid in the group that likes that type of thing, so
Yeah.
he's looking at it or something. But plunk that canoe in the water.
Yeah.
And you don't have to teach us.
No.
We'll bail in and we'll go from there, and then we'll learn the history and culture, which it is a Canadian culture.
Yeah.
It is our story because that story is very intertwined in over the last 200, 300 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that's again, it baffles me that it's taken this long, and it's sad in a way because a lot of people grew up without it.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up without it, because I would have loved to get in a canoe. I
Mm-hmm.
would have loved to get in a canoe. I mean, when I was a little kid, we pretended that like logs were canoes, and
Yeah.
and friends from Skeechiston would come up and we'd all play and all that stuff, and but we never got that opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And so now that and you need the art. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
you need the art on the wall, but
Mm-hmm.
that making it real and tangible, that especially for young people, and I think you're right. Not young people, just Indigenous young people.
Mm-hmm.
For I mean, all the kids that are growing up in these communities,
Mm-hmm.
they just miss out on it. If it stays on the wall, they'll miss out on it, and
Yeah.
it's as simple as that. They won't look. They might go on one field trip. That's it.
Yeah. Well, again, we both grew up in the through the Ashcroft school,
Mm-hmm.
high school. The cool thing about that, when I built this project, the number one school that came out first of all was Ashcroft,
Oh, was it?
and all of those kids' parents who we played hockey with, the Beckett's and the Hunt, all these different family names back there. Their kids were coming in now to learn about those canoes. Where their dads, like you, we played, but we never done it. Now the kids actually done it, and they stuck with this canoe from the beginning, middle, and end.
Mm-hmm.
So it was good to see that next
Yeah.
I guess for me, the next generation coming up actually touching and experiencing it. And that's something that needs to still fester and grow. And I think what's happening now, again, because of the cultural disruption, I call it, and what you call Canadian, I don't call our culture as a culture anymore in my head because it's more of a heritage.
I
Because
remember you said that, and yeah.
and we're blending our cultures in different forms and ways now, and that's not going to be stopped
Yeah.
again. So for me, how do we make it a heritage, and how do we? And I always laugh because I always say, what puts us all together and takes away all of that is hockey.
Mm-hmm.
All right, when
I get it.
when the Olympics come on, hockey is
You have no idea how often hockey comes up on the show, and Gowdy is not a fan.
yeah.
So our goal next year is basically just
Yeah.
to make you a hockey fan. It's going to happen.
I watch hockey. I do when when I go to a restaurant and it's on.
we
I'm
got
like, oh, it's a hockey.
we got to put you on skates then. I'll bring a pair of skates for you versus the work boots.
We
you
need to
see
do a
back there,
skate
yeah.
tour down the river.
But it's definitely, if you grew up in definitely in the woods or wherever, there was always a pond or a place to
Mhm.
skate, especially the boys. We definitely found that as
And my
Uh,
sisters.
and a place, a serenity place where you just can be a kid,
Yeah.
and every age group came together, and it didn't matter, and
Mhm.
you always had mentors and people that you followed. And poor me, I become a goalie, so I said I didn't know how to skate, but apparently goalies are a better skater than a guy out. I don't know. I told him, depends if you fall down and try to get up with your gear.
Yeah.
You're a fish out of water. So,
Actually, you used my brother's pads at one
yes,
point. Yeah.
that's what started my career, was
Yeah.
your brother's
My
pads.
my late brothers, I think my dad gave Skeechiston the
Yeah.
goalie pads, right?
And they couldn't find a goalie. Well, they did have a goalie, but I don't think he was a goalie. I wasn't any better. I'll put it that way. I'm not trying to put him down. It just felt like I had more of, and I just had more of a passion for it. And
Yeah.
again, growing up, I never had the opportunity to play hockey. But when I hit my adult years, I got to get back involved, and that's how I've been involved now for 50, going on 34 years. And it just feels like yesterday. Still
Yeah.
to me, I'm still that kid when I put on the gear, and it's fun.
Yeah.
Definitely enjoyable.
Yeah. I was curious about something. Did you growing up, have you I mean now you're immersed in culture and in not in just your not just in your heritage, but in the heritage of all these different communities around British Columbia, and you've been traveling, and we'll just start here for now. How much of what you know of your heritage, your culture, your people was learned as a kid as opposed to now that you've kind of went in and really got involved in it?
Well, I always say there's two different types. One that's mind, one that's body.
Mm.
The body one was simple. We picked, we gathered, we hunted, we fished. That was kind of most of the teachings I've had growing up. But as I got older, I started learning more about the long hair, and again, it's all borrowed Indigenous practices. It was never something that was brought into our territory. It was something we brought in individually,
Mm-hmm.
and we shared that. The sun dances, the winter, the smudges, the sweat lodges, the different spiritual practices. But it all had the same purpose at the end. At the bottom line, it had a purpose, and that was to take care of yourself, your family. You know, it goes up the chain
Mm-hmm.
as far as people, and also respecting the land and the animals. And for me, the cultural aspect of it now is really shown who I am. Why I wear what I wear. This is an elk vest that my friend made, and she asked me, "What would you want to represent?" I said, "Well, I've always worked. I don't know. Bears always seem to be drawn to me, even though I'm not from a bear clan, like from the Carrier or from the West Coast. How they label, or from back east, how they label themselves as different groups. Again, every culture has a different form." And our culture was more, like you said earlier, when you looked at the canoe on the wall, we had working art. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't art you put on the wall and got to look at it. We actually had to use it and to survive.
Well, back then it was hard life up
Yeah,
there. I mean,
yeah,
that's rugged. That's rugged territory.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
guess the only insight I can show people that kind of lifestyle was when you seen the movie Revelant
Mm.
with Leo DiCaprio.
Yeah.
That really shows you how harsh the conditions were, and there was no forgiveness to
Yeah.
anything or anyone. Uh, Eat to be eaten kind of
Yeah.
attitude, right? So for me, the culture, I started learning more and more. I started learning again through different mentors. I always looked for, I guess, growing up through my personal journey, I was always looking for that one guy to be the mentor and show me everything I needed to know, like a father figure should
Yeah.
have, or a male figure should have. And when I was going through my personal healing journey, I got grabbed by an elder, brought me to the mirror and says, "He's right there." And I looked in the mirror and that was me. I had to fill up that jar of knowledge and wanting to learn, and I was who I was. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why, again, my personality is so easy to get along with people because I've always asked questions. And once you finally go through that motion, it changed I, thought of thinking, how do you pass on these traditions and how do you pass on these opportunities, not only to yourself, but through the guests and visitors that you interact with in the tourism industry, but also educating your peers or your coworkers of what the culture means, and then really how does it mean to you every day. So again, I always said when I started getting involved with the Indigenous tourism industry, it wasn't a job, wasn't a career, it was a lifestyle. And it shows in who you are when you start following
Mm-hmm.
your lifestyle because it comes naturally. It's not something you set up or stage. So that's what authenticity, and that's what I really want to bring to the tourism industry, is that story, that individual story, community story, nation story, and international. So I really got the opportunity to travel and move around the world this last 12 months. I would say I visited 7 countries, and boy, I got to see a variety of different cultures, rich cultures. And when I look at Canada, I always look back and, flying home, we're such a young country.
Mm-hmm.
We're babies compared to what the world is around us. And we really need to get along. And I think we have it right. And it's really cool because I think sometimes with the industries we follow and we chase that comfort of life or lifestyle, sometimes we work too hard. We work to live. And reality, when I go to Europe, they live to work. It's totally reversed.
Or they work to live.
Yeah,
They work to live.
they live to work. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's so funny that you say that. I say that with my husband all the time
yeah,
about Central America.
yeah,
It's the same thing.
yeah,
That over there, you work to live, and
yeah.
here,
You live to work.
yeah,
Yeah,
you live to
yeah,
work.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's reversed,
It's
right?
reversed. Yeah.
And it's just the casual of eating dinner at 9 o'clock.
Mhm.
It's not 5 o'clock and be in bed at this time. It's not structured. It's structured in a way where people can relax and they bring their families out. Kids are running around 11 midnight.
Mhm.
It's just so relaxed. And next day they start over again.
Yeah.
And then when they take their days off, they take their days off. But you just you kind of grow through that and to get those experiences to come home. And I can tell you one thing, why Indigenous people struggle in some ways, because that's exactly how we live. We're not out there to make the $1 million, and there's some are now. The next generation that's coming are
Yeah.
going down that path and want to be successful. And there's people in our generation who are like, we're just happy to have what we have,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and live the way we live. We live very simple lives. So and that shows in how we take care of our natural resources around us, and that's really huge to us, though.
But what do you think that balance is? Because actually, we should give a shout out to our sponsors before we go. I will remember
Before
that
we
question.
continue,
Yeah.
Yes.
don't
Um,
forget.
I won't forget my question. No.
Yes, okay. We have more sponsors. If you want to sponsor, please let us know.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yes, we are brought to you also by Streamline. They offer a complete package of fleet management solutions with 3 incredible products. Your first up, NaviStream, their onboard intelligence and telematics system. NaviLink, their vehicle automation and IoT platform, and Dagama, their dynamic transportation management system. Please visit stti.com for the Streamline advantage. We also are brought to you by Resource World magazine. They report on the business of mining, oil and gas, green technologies, and the events that affect these sectors. You can catch their February-March issue and see all the latest news at resourceworld.com. I believe their next issue is coming out too.
Oh yeah.
But that'll
'Cause
be,
it's every
I think,
2 months,
mid.
right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So that's coming out. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, Power Zone equipment. When you need a specialized pump for any type of fluid handling or dewatering, then you'll want to have your pump designed by by Power Zone Equipment. You can visit them at powerzone.com where you will find thousands of new and rebuilt pumps, motors, and engines.
Thank you.
Yes.
And thank you to our sponsors. Genuinely, genuinely appreciate it because we love doing the show, and we need to show up. We need our guests. We need sponsors, and we need the people to watch. And people have been
Yes.
watching, so thank you. The question that I had was the balance between the two, because on one hand, you do need the lawyers coming out of the Indigenous communities to do these negotiations. You need the people that are getting involved with starting up new businesses. You're an entrepreneur now. You're seeing it more and more. I'm seeing so many of my friends that I grew up with now, and you can there or and some of the new friends I've made, that the way that they're moving into competitive fields, and their voice is definitely being heard. How do you find that balance between keeping an eye on your heritage, protecting it, growing it, because heritage is 50 years from now, today will be the history. Preserving this history of your people, of Canada, and as Canadians, again, not just as Indigenous people. How do we preserve that, but specific for Indigenous people, but also bring that competitiveness to be able to walk into those negotiating rooms and get the best deals and move, and also not just get the best deal, but move the industries forward so that people can get the jobs and the projects don't take 20 years to happen. And how do you find that, like, you have kids. How do you find that balance between take care of it, but also move forward? And that might include the universities. That might include starting a business that's going to just beat on you for a couple of years as you're trying to move it forward. How do you kind of find that balance, do you think?
I guess for me, I always say I always said there were always 2 types of Indigenous people I grew up with. One was culturally rich, financially poor. Flip it around, the other one was financially rich, culturally poor. So you had either choice to live in the community and suffer if there was nothing around you as far as an industry, and then the other move was to leave to get your formal education, to go get that. So in one sense, you stayed back and preserved your culture, and the other one, you've left it behind and put it behind you, but it's still a part of who you are. So again, to tie the two, again, to be an Indigenous tourism entrepreneur, you have to have the business set mind and you have to have the cultural set mind. And the only way I've ever married those 2 together was education. Now, you look at education by educating yourself on both levels, but also making sure that education's formal, if it's formal, or whether you're learning it through a lifestyle.
Yeah.
How do you, if you work for companies, how you develop that? And again, going back to Quail Lodge, I've really seen that they built an organization 25 years. That's what they were celebrating, or 25 years for that lodge, and that was one of the first Indigenous tourism companies that were actually out there before the organization you see on the screen there, Indigenous Tourism of BC was there. They were at 21 years. So this company was ahead already of before the organization association even showed up. So they already had an insight of how to shoot, and it was going to be a training ground for their people. That's what that lodge was going to become, a training center, so they can
Oh.
move out into the world and get adjusted.
Oh, because the lodge came before the golf course.
Yeah,
Oh, I never put the two together. I just assumed golf course and lodge, but
yeah.
it was two different things.
25 years and 10 years was the anniversary of the
Oh,
golf
okay,
course.
okay.
So again, two different entities. They're bringing in another industry. That's a tough industry to be a part of, and they are now one of the top 10 golf courses in British Columbia, based on the land and the natural setting it's set on. So that's why I love that place.
Oh, that course kicks my ass.
Yeah, chip and putt kicks your butt too. Yeah, but we don't talk about that level either. So but it definitely gives that's the way I've started realizing how the tourism is shaped. I always think tourism industry for me was always backwards because I couldn't understand the concept of how tourism is worked in my mind. Because when I looked at it, when I said Indigenous tourism was basically how we look at our land today and how we preserved it, was we took care of the land, we took care of the animals, and we took care of ourselves. That's what Indigenous tourism is. And that hasn't changed as far from a cultural sense or a heritage sense. But when you flip it over in the tourism industry, it was the people manipulating the land and forgetting the animals. They were building on their empires with pushing everything out of the way. Where now the tourism industry has changed to the biosphere sustainability approaches, where they're now looking at the economic value, the environment, and the social issues that come along with the tourism industry. Because it's a growing and it's a fast-growing industry, it just keeps growing. It's kind of like what you want to see in a stock market, right? It's going to go like this forever. But then you see that again going overseas and seeing the over tourism. How are we going to slow it down? Because we're creating a beast. We're creating an industry that the locals are getting pushed out, and you really got to slow down. So we have people out there too are telling us to remind us, and that's our job, is to remind how we do our best practice. And that's why Indigenous tourism is such a key component to the growth of the industry, or the tourism industry, is because any industry, whether it's the golf, it's all land based, right? It's all people based and all animal based. How do we preserve what's there already? What's that ecosystem that's there already? And how are we going to build around that? And how we're going to get people to come to respect when we invite people from around the world to come to our home, to our backyard, and they're not throwing garbage everywhere around because that's just something they see. It's a natural thing. So how do we get that rethinking them to come in to respect what we have? And when I went to Europe and got to see the museums and the paintings and the countryside, they're preserved because nobody disrupted them. And when those guests come into that community or that country, they're not respecting the same values, and that's why there's why the locals are pushing back, because they do not want to see what they have preserved. We are starting to have a little bit of that effect with some of our Indigenous. One of our elders' concerns is that we're already dealing with that already, even with our locals disrespecting our landmarks, our traditional landmarks, like balancing rocks that are back in your territory, spray painting, knocking them down. There's stories behind those rocks, and there's protocols. So it's already happened. So we have to start educating. Key to get the two worlds together is to educate ourselves again, and that's so important on so much levels, to preserve it for our next generation, which you were asking earlier. So it's definitely it's a work in progress. It's a lifelong commitment that you have to work towards your culture.
That must be. I've never been to Europe, so that must be quite the experience. I mean, we came from the same areas, so it's quite an experience to go to somewhere where this culture is so different. What did you already touched on it a little bit about, you see how they've preserved their culture. How much do you then take back, and when you're coming here, and apply it to what you're doing now, and go, oh, there is a different way that we can preserve this culture in a way that when the guests come in, they'll also help us preserve it. They're not just going to disrupt it.
Well, I guess I would say it's like waking up the old guard. You're waking up that spirit again within the people to bring that culture back and those best practices, so that it's present, uh, not just in a form of people coming to see it, but in a form of how you live everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
Again, goes back to the lifestyle, respecting the land, respecting the animals, and respecting the natural resources and the people that live there. And I think when you have a great guest, I always say when I always looked at a person that walked through a door, a tourism door, no matter where it was, you walked in as a guest, and the one thing that Canadians do very well is you leave as a friend.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear these conversations about how the United States, how they act and how brass they are. And I have these conversations with my different friends and colleagues. And I said, well, you know what? They tell you how it is. Like it or not, they're going to tell you how it is. And you say, oh, Canadians are so nice. I said, I don't think we're nice. We're just more tolerant.
Mm.
I think we still struggle with, we're just more nicer in a more quieter way. But, we just don't seem to have to disrupt the apple cart sometimes to when somebody walks into a room and wants to take lead. And that's just, again, their environment they grew in, their values. So, I always sense when they don't understand, so we got to educate them. Rather than pointing fingers and getting mad at them, I think our patient levels, that's where a big part of our cultural teachings are, is the patient level. And I
Yeah.
think that's what I've had all my life. Because
Yeah.
I don't think you've ever seen me mad too often.
I've never seen you mad, but you're also not afraid to upset the apple cart. You're not afraid to say what you think and the way things should be. And if somebody is conducting themselves, I mean, I know you've called out people if they're being greedy, if they're, being disrespectful. And I guess that'd be another thing, is how do you find that that sort of, is that a natural thing that it just comes to you, or is that you're willing to kind of step into the fray
Mm.
and say what you think, but not really, you're not really rattled. You're just kind of saying it.
Yeah.
Most people
Again,
can't do that.
well, my late dad, he was always quiet. He sat in a room with the true elders, I call them, who actually, before our chief and council political election code and all that came in, they would sit around as a community. It didn't matter if you were part of the community, if you lived in the area, you were part of the community. And they had non-Indigenous members in those groups. And they would talk about the land. They would talk about how they would organize themselves. They never cared really who you were as long as you were respecting the space you were in. And I guess for me, it really resonates how I got that is because I got to grow up at the Hat Creek Ranch site when I was a child, and I sat around 20, 25 cowboys,
Mm-hmm.
and I got to pick and learn from them. And they all had the same level of thinking that's respecting who you were, and it didn't matter if you were the boss or you were the cook or whatever role you played in that ranch. They treated each other with fairness, and they knew what each job was. They never demeaned anybody. It wasn't a value of money. It was the value of what their input was and how they were helping out. And that's kind of the world I grew up in, Jared. That's why I am who I am,
Yeah.
because I got to learn from different levels of thinking of men and women. You know, my mom still teaches me the simple things in life, and I think I'm very grateful. She's 81 years old, and my dad just turned 85 this year, so he just passed on 85. But and he was raised by his grandparents, and I was raised with my grandparents too. But I mean, when you had 25 grandchildren running around the house, their world is a little different. So
Yeah.
there's no more stress on us than it is what they had to deal with. It's just
Yeah.
different stresses and the challenges they had to grow up with. But
Yeah.
family cultures and values are definitely a huge part of what Indigenous is.
Yeah. How people? Oh, sorry, Yada.
No, it's okay. Actually, from your childhood and growing up and what you were taught and from your own heritage, what is something that kind of stands out that you've brought in to immerse into tourism and what you do now?
Our 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 I guess for me it's the stories. We're storytellers, and whether you went through your own personal journey, whether you've gathered the history from before you, it's carrying on that legacy of our history. And again, it's either a physical form or a mental form. How you get your message across. So when people just want to be genuine, and I never had to be anybody different. I've always been who I had to be because that's who I wanted to be. And I always used the three ways of dealing with that. That was with your mind, your heart, and your stomach. because your gut never told you the wrong story. It's 100% correct. Sometimes your heart gets in the way of your decisions. Your mind sometimes gives you the idea of where you need to go.
Mm-hmm.
So and that's kind of how you start as being an entrepreneur. You have to have all three in check before you do the right things. And I think sometimes we miss one of those steps, or one overpowers the other. So again, it's that balance of
Yeah.
the traditional values, and that's what I've learned over. I think since I've got to know Jared over the years, that's one of the things I've really learned was how to balance the four elements,
Yeah.
and that's intellectual, the spiritual, the physical, and the mental. You know, the emotional side of it. So
Mm.
I knew where my strengths were. I just needed to work on my weaknesses, like everybody.
Yeah. What you 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 have a gift for creating partnerships. I want to talk when we did work for you. One of the hardest things when you're, especially in our case, you know, when you're dealing with money and it's changing hands, and you're promising that something's going to happen here 2 months down the road or 3 months, but you're handing over money now, and that it really puts a strain on friendships. It puts a strain on, and even in business, it's almost like two dogs circling each other half the time. And your partner in Moxon Trails, Greg Hoff, we've gotten to know him over the years, and he's got a ton of energy, but he's from a completely different part than you are. And I talked about it with Rory, is when that whole time we were doing business together, there was never a sense that you were questioning us. You wanted us to get good results, but you trusted us to do it, and it makes you want to do better for that person, because you feel a sense of all of a sudden you're being trusted, so you reciprocate that trust. And that relationships you've built with Greg. I mean, all these boards is a sign of all these different people that want your voice there. And how do you build that trust? How how do you build that trust with people for them to trust you, but also you come across that you are very trusting, but you're no nonsense, but you're also very trusting. How did you come to that? Is that a way you decided to be, to put that sort of that faith in people that they will do a good job, or is that just where does that come from?
It again, it any relationship you work with, whether it's I've been working now in these chair positions in the tourism industry of BC here, whether it's Destination BC, the Minister of Tourism, uh, Lisa Bear, no matter what the title was, they had to get to know who you were, and that relationship really needs to resonate at the beginning, because that's where that circling and all that goes away.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're sitting down, and when you finally leave, and when you finally give them a gift, for example, I had to give Minister Bear a gift. It was a blanket of diversity. It had a circle of a West Coast design, but it was a diversity of hands. People come together, all different colors. And I explained it to her. It wasn't a gift from my territory, but it was a gift from the West Coast territory where we were on. And behind that story was, how do we all get along? And we're all sitting around in that room talking about doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that work when you don't try to build those relationships? So they get to know you not only from a business standpoint, because yes, pen to paper is one thing, and then you have lawyers that support that and back that up. But when we walk away today, and I think God is going to get to know me a little bit more after today, and why we get along so well, is because I do not believe paper is what makes us different. It's our relationships and our beliefs and our values that we follow. And I never had to double check somebody, because they knew what I was coming from. Even though we had a longer term relationship versus Gotti, I look at that. You trust her, I trust her because I trust you.
Mm-hmm.
It's again, it goes down a line of relationships.
And people say that. I mean, I probably hear that once every 2 months. Someone sitting there and they say that, but you genuinely believe it.
Hmm.
You actually live by it, and I've
Hmm.
seen how you do that, and it's hard for me. I'm not going to lie. I mean, it's so watching you treat people that way with not second guessing them.
Hmm.
It took me a while to get used to, especially when we started actually doing business. I thought, like, you're not going to question this. You're just going to let me. Okay, okay. Well, that was easy,
Yeah.
and I just went and did it, and I mean, well, I mean,
Yeah.
we're getting questioned all the time,
Yeah.
and we accept it. We go, no, that's part of business.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, when someone's not doing that, it's like, what? This is strange.
Mm-hmm.
But now here we are sitting here, and there's, you should just keep moving forward. You and Greg,
Mm-hmm.
you just keep moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
I just it sort of amazes me how many people, I probably even said it, but to live by it, that's a totally different thing. And that must, because you do work with youth, and that
Mm-hmm.
must just have a huge influence on them, seeing that confidence in other people as opposed to just confidence in yourself and that sort of thing. I mean, you must see the results of that when you're working with these kids.
Oh, the choices we make as a young person, always the wrong decisions. But as we grow into our own selves and learning in a comfortable position where we're at in our own bodies and minds, and that's where, again, going back to the gut,
Mm.
heart, and mind. Sometimes we always get told that's what's better for us. Again, parents, we're always guilty of that, of
Mhm.
being a parent, of telling your children, this is the best practice, this is the best way, this is how you do. And when your children grow up, everything you've taught them, they've forgotten, and you've forgotten, and you're trying to survive. It's just like the animals.
Mhm.
I think the mother instinct will be there, the father instinct will be there, but once you throw them out into the mainstream society and watch them, all you're trying to do is give them tools. That's the only thing. You can't teach them values. They'll learn their values, but they'll always refer back to what you taught them, and to treat people well. Like, you've got to know my older son Matthew,
Mhm.
and he has all those qualities. He works in a fitness world, and he's a guy in the front door, and he's welcoming everybody. And I watch how he interacts with people, all ages. It just becomes a natural
Mhm.
fit, because you got to see what I did at the Quail Lodge and got to see me grow that, how I was growing as a person. And he'd never see me mistreat anybody. And I said, you never have to be that type of person to do it. Whether a person walks in with a bad attitude or not a great day, just to smile and say, you know what, maybe you need a hug, maybe you need, a slap in the butt or whatever. But it's just something that people realize, that you need to be validated and reassured that you are a good person. And I think there's not a person in this world that isn't a good person. They just got bad habits or make bad choices.
Mhm.
And some do it longer than others. Some do it in short term. Some could carry it on through their lifestyle. And I guess for me, it really comes down to what makes you happy. How would you want to be treated? How do you want to treat people? So it comes down to personal values, to, again, the opportunity to have cultural or heritage values to attach to that. So that really strengthens who I am up and why I believe and where I'm at.
I think it would be fitting to end with the question is, what's the end goal? What's the legacy now that you're trying to leave? Because I know it's not that you want to have 1 billion canoes in the water and have $1 trillion in the bank. Although nobody would say that that's a bad thing, but well, some people would, I guess. But um, what is that legacy that you're trying to leave in your community, with your family, with Canada as a people?
I guess the slogan I was thinking in my head is sharing is caring, right? And it's a simple slogan. And generosity, whether it's people on the streets, people with addictions, people with the power to make those changes. For me, it really has to. My legacy is to see those little lessons that I share with, and the little things that I pass on, whether they need it or not, is a human element. And I guess that's why, to me, color is just a color.
Mhm.
And for me, I want my children to have that same ability. I definitely want the youth to understand that they have those opportunities to travel the world, no matter who you are, where you come from, and to give everybody an opportunity to know who you are. And that's very rare, because, like you said earlier, everybody's too closed off. They question you because they don't want to get to know you on a personal level.
Mhm.
And that's why I said that slogan: walk in as a guest, you leave as a friend. And
Mhm.
that goes to anybody that walks through your door, like I did today.
Yeah. And thank you very much for coming through the door, Frank. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you.
Thank Gotti.
We'll do a quick wrap up here and going to this camera, Gowdy.
Yes, this one.
Thank you for watching the episode. I hope you enjoy it. Go to Moxon Trails. You can start. They're rolling it out, so you can now book the tours online.
Yep.
It's going to be a beautiful experience, and you've promised me a seat
Yes.
in the first tour this year, right?
Yes. Well, May 1st is our opening day
Okay.
for our operations. But in April here, we're going to be inviting a select few that's going to come down the river to experience firsthand what it's like to be in our canoe business.
Yeah, it's going to be amazing. So yeah, please check it out. We'll put links and everything
Yeah,
for everybody.
absolutely.
Please follow the show and share the show.
Yes.
Yeah, tell
Don't
people
just
about
follow,
it.
share it.
Yeah. I'm one of those people. I see such good stuff and I just follow it and I don't share it.
Yeah.
I'll send it to you and we're go, oh, watch this, and I should share it out more. So
Yeah.
don't be like me. Where can they follow us, Gabby?
You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, all at Crownsman P. Also subscribe to our YouTube channel, Crownsman Partners. We've got all the episodes there. An episode every Friday, other than last Friday, unfortunately.
Yeah, it happens.
But yes, every Friday, brand new episode and all there. So subscribe, keep up to date. Also follow us on our group, the Crownsman Podcast.
Yep.
We've got some great contests and giveaways.
Yeah, we're doing a giveaway today, actually. We just posted up. Yeah.
So please follow and win something.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for watching. We are the voice of industry, and when we say that, we always have to clarify the voice of industry is actually the people that come in. We're just giving the platform.
Yeah.
So thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting us, and we will see you next episode.